Okay, chapter 12, Dynasty 19 continued. I don't know why they don't put dynasties in entire, just one program by themselves or something, but Uther, Ma'at, Ra, Setep and Ra, Ra, Mesu, Marie, Yemen, uh, Ramses II, 1333 BCE. So we'll have to go back as we go along just to pronounce them right. This is the king who, above all others, bears the names of next to the conqueror, by whom the monuments and papyri often designate by his popular names of Ses, Tesu, Setesu, or Sestura. That is, the Sethosis, who is called Rameses Mentho, the Sesostris of the Greeks. The number of his monuments still existing in Egypt and Nubia are so great that the historian finds it difficult to know where to begin or end his work. If to honor the memory of his father be the chief duty of a loyal son, we shall see that this was the feeling of Ra, Usur, Ma'at, Snoopin. What we see Amun Ra Mer Mus Su. Okay, that makes more sense. The beginning is made easy. King Seti I was dead, and the temple, the Abydos, was still unfinished. The first care of Ra Mus was to complete the work and record the intention of which was uppermost in his mind. The lord of the land arose as king to show honor to his father. In his first year, on his first journey to Thebes, he had caused likeness of his father, who was King Seti I, to be sculptured, the one in Thebes, the other in Memphis, at the entrance of the gate, which he had executed for himself, besides those who were in Nippur, the necropolis of Abydos. Thus he fulfilled the wish which moved his heart since he had been on earth, on the ground of the entity of Nippur. He renewed the remembrance of his father and of those who rest in the underworld, and that he made his name to live, and caused his portraits to be made, and fixed the revenues set apart for his venerated person, and filled his house and richly decked out his altars. The walls were rebuilt, which had become old in his favorite house. The halls in his temple were rebuilt. Its walls were covered. Its gates were raised up. Whatever had fallen into decay in the burial place of his father, in the necropolis, was restored, and the works of art which had been carried away were brought back into the interior. I'm gonna check. Okay, I was just seeing how in Ramses and Murray Almond, there's this mu symbol. So Ra, so Yemen, Ra, Mu, Mus, Sasum. Okay. The king now returned from the capital of the land of the south. As soon as the sun had risen, the journey was commenced. As the ships of the king sailed on, they threw their brightness on the river. The order was given for the journey down the stream to the stronghold of the city of Yemen Ra, Mu, Mus, Su, the conqueror. Then the king, in order to behold his father, made the rowers enter the canal of Niffer, with the intention of offering a sacrifice to the beneficent entity Onefer, with his choicest libations, and of praying to of his brother Unher, the son of Ra'in, as which he abides there. And he found the halls of the dead of the former kings and their graves, which are in Abydos, hastening to the beginning of desolation. Their burial places had become dilapidated from their foundations. The stones were torn away out of the ground. Their walls lay scattered about on the road, no brick held to another. The hall of the second birth lay in ruins. Nothing had been built up for the father by his son, who should have been busied in preserving it according to expectations, since its possessor had flown up to heaven. Not one son had renewed the memorial of his father who rested in the grave. There was the temple of Ptah-mer-Satin. The front and back elevations were in processes of building when he entered the realm of heaven. Unfinished was his monument. The columns were not raised on their bases. His statues lay upon the earth. They were not sculptured according to the corresponding measure of the golden chamber. His revenues failed. The servants of the temple, without distinction, had taken what was brought in from the fields, the boundary marks of what were not staked out on the land. The king speaks to the chamberlain at his side. Speak that there may be assembled the princes, the favorites of the king, the commanders of the bodyguards, as they are, all of them, the architects, according to their number, and the superintendents of the house of the rolls of the books. When they had come before the king, their noses touched the ground, and their feet lay on the ground for joy. They fall down to the ground, and with their hands they prayed to the king. They praised this divine benefactor, while they exalted his grace in his presence. Yeah, wouldn't it be better just to pray thanking for the king, or to say, well, because of this, The king speaks to them after an interval. I've called you because of a determination regarding that which I am about to do. I beheld the house of the necropolis, the graves of Abydos. The buildings of them require labor from the times of their possessors down to the present day, when the sun rose in the place of his father. He did not renew the memorial of his parent. In my mind, I have pondered with myself the splendid occasion for good works for coming times. The most beautiful thing to behold, the best thing to hear, is a child with a thankful breast, whose heart beats for his father. Wherefore, my heart urges me to do what is good for Meneptah. I will cause them to talk forever and eternally of his son, who has awakened his name to life. My father, Yasir, Osiris, will reward me for this long existence, like his son, Horus. Let me do what he did. Let me be excellent, just as he was excellent for my parent. I am scion of the sun entity, Ra. I give orders for this building. I myself laid the foundation stone to build the work. I had an image made of him who begot me, my father, of gold, quite new. In the first year of my reign as king, I had given orders to provide his temple with stores. I secured to him his fields, and fixed their boundaries, and appointed him revenues for worship, and arranged the sacrifices of oxen, and geese, and bread, and wine, and incense, and other things. I planted for him groves to grow up by him, for him. This was his house under my protection. I took upon myself all his buildings from the time that I was crowned as king, and thus I was a child whose heart was full of thanks towards his father, who had exalted me. I will renew the memorial. I will not neglect his tomb, as children are accustomed to do, who do not remember their father. Men shall speak of me as a son who did good, and shall estimate the strength of my father, in me his child. I will complete it because I am lord of the land. I will take care of it because it is fitting and right. I clothe the walls in the temple of my parent. I will commission the man of my choice to hasten the buildings for him, to build up again what was sunken of its walls, and to raise up his temple wings on the front side to clothe this house, erect its pillars, and to place the blocks on the places of the foundation stone. Beautifully shall the most splendid double memorial be made at once. Let it be inscribed with my name and with the name of my father. As the son is, so his father who begot him. The king's friends speak in answer to the divine benefactor. That which thou hast determined, O king, do it. Remember that which is sunk in forgetfulness. Renew the monuments in the necropolis, and all the plans which were behindhand, execute them as is right and fitting. Thou art not king of the upper and lower Egypt. Do good even as thou willest. Let thy heart be satisfied in doing what is right. For that which is done by the honor of the entities, that will be accepted and rewarded by immortals. When thou hereafter shall rise to heaven, when thy grace raises himself to the orb of light, then shall the eyes see thy glorious virtues in the sight of the entities and men. Thus do thou renew memorial after memorial to the entities. Therefore shall thy father, Ra, command that thy name shall resound in all lands, beginning in the south with the Kent Hun Upper, northwards from the shores of the sea as far as the nations of earthen, the foreign fortress and towns of kings and the cities, well guarded and occupied with their inhabitants and dwellers in all places. They speak of thee, that thou art as an entity for everyone. They awake to offer incense to thee. Thus, according to the will of thy father Tamu, of the Black Land, Egypt, and the Red Land, Tisheret, praise thee, O king. When the speech from the lips of the princes before their lord was ended, and before that sentence there's some missing parts here, just as before I gave orders for the buildings after the sun entity Ra. Then the king commanded and gave commission to the architects and separated the people of the masons and of the stone cutters with the help of the graver and the draughtsman and all kinds of artists to build the most holy place for his father and to raise up what had fallen into decay in the necropolis and in the temple of his father, who sojourns among the deceased ones. Then he began to have the statues of his father carved from the first year. The revenues were doubled for his worship. His temple was enriched according to the number of its wants. He appointed its register of fields and peasants and herds. He named its priests according to their service, and the prophet to raise in his hands. Well, if that prophet's spiritually gifted, obviously a false prophet if it's just whoever makes their way up the ranks, the incense vessel. And he appointed the temple servants for the performance of the works for him. His barns were many, full of wheat, and his storehouses in all plenty. His domain was immense in the south and in the north, and was placed under the administration of the superintendent of his temple. In such wise did the king Yemen Ra Mu Mus Su, the second, for his father, King Ptah Teen, under the protection of Unefer. He repeated what had been done for his honor at Thebes and On and in Memphis, where his statues rested in their places, and in all the places of the granaries. These are the words of King Yemen Ra Mu Mus Su. To sing what he did for his father, the Yesir king, the dead king, Ptah Satin. He speaks thus: awake, raise thy face to heaven, behold the sun, my father Meneptah. Thou, who art like God,
Here am I, who make thy name to live. I am thy guardian, and my care is directed to thy temple and to thy altars, which are raised up again. Thou restest in the deep like Ysir, while I rule like Ra among men, and the great throne of Tamu, like her, the son of Ast, Isis, the guardian of his father. Beautiful is that which I have done for thee. Thou enterest on a second existence. I caused thee to be fashioned. I built thy house which thou didst love, in which thy image stands, in the necropolis of Abydos forever. I set apart revenues for thee, for thy worship daily, to be just towards thee. Is it really sincere worship if it's only, if you have to pay people to do it? If anything is in my power, which seems to be wanting to thee, I do it for thee. Thy heart shall be satisfied, that the best shall be done for thy name. I appoint for thee the priests of the vessel of holy water, provided with everything for sprinkling the water on the ground, besides meat and drink. I myself, am come here to behold thy temple, near that of Nefer, the eternal king. I urged on the building of it. I clothed the walls. I did that which thou didst wish, that it may be done for thy whole house. I established thy name therein to all eternity. May it be done in truth. May it succeed according to my intention. I dedicated to thee the lands of the south for the service of thy temple, and the lands of the north, they bring to thee their gifts before thy beautiful countenance. I gathered together the people of thy service, one and all, assigning to them, to the profit of thy temple, all thy property shall remain in one great whole to keep up thy temple for all time. I made presents to thy silver chamber. It is rich in treasures, which are well pleasing to the heart. And I apportioned to thee the tributes at the same time. I dedicated to thee ships with their freight on the great sea, which should bring to thee the wonderful productions of the Holy Land. The merchants carry on their commerce with their wares, and their productions of gold and silver and bronze. I fixed for thee the number of fields according to the proportion of the claims of thy temple. Great is their number according to their valuation in acres. I provided thee with land surveyors and husbandmen to deliver the corn for thy revenues. I dedicated to thee barks with their crews and laborers for the felling of wood, for the purpose of building what is wanting in ships for thy house. I give thee herds of all kinds of cattle to increase thy revenues according to what is right. I fix for thee the tribute of birds in the marshes for thy necessary sustenance. I cause to be delivered to thee living geese, to keep up the breed of the birds, to be delivered to thee. I gave to thee fishermen on the river, and all the lakes to feed the workmen who load the sea-going ships. I have provided thy temple with all kinds of guilds of my handicraftsmen. Thy temple servants have been made up to their full number from the best people, and the peasants pay their taxes in woven stuffs for thy drapery. Thy men servants and maid servants work in the fields, in all the town districts. Each man thus performs his service to fill thy house. Thou hast entered into the realm of heaven. Thou accompaniest the sun entity Ra. Thou art united with the stars and the moon. Thou restest in the deep, like those who dwell in it with Nefer.
the eternal. Thy hands move, the entity to move in heaven and on earth. Like the wandering stars and the fixed stars, thou remainest in the forepart of the bark of millions. When the sun rises in the tabernacle of heaven, thine eyes behold his splendor. When the moon, the evening sun, goes to rest on the earth, thou art in his train. Thou enterest the secret house before his Lord. Thy foot wanders in the deep. Thou remainest in the company of the entities of the underworld. But I obtain by my powers the breath of life. At thy awakening, thou glorious one, and I praise thy numerous names day by day. I who love my Father, I let myself be guided by thy virtue. So long as I stay on earth, I will offer a sacrifice to thee. My hand shall bring the libations for thy name to thy remembrance in all thy abodes. Come, speak to Ra, that he may grant long years of life to his son, and to Unefer with a heart full of love, that he may grant length of time upon length of time, united to the 30 years feasts of Jubilee, to King Ra Massu, the first. Well will it be for thee that I should be king for a long time, for thou wilt be honored by a good son who remembers his father. I will be a protector and guardian for thy temple by day, to have regard to the wants of thy worship in every way. If I should hear any injury which threatens to invade it, I will give the order immediately to remove it in every way. Thou shalt be treated as if thou wert still alive. So long as I shall reign, my attention shall be directed continually to thy temple. My heart beats for thee. I will be thy guardian for honor of thy name. If thou also remainest in the deep, the best, the very best, shall be thy portion. As long as I live, I, King Yaman Ra Mu Mus Su, the second. And wouldn't it be better to carry on the legacy of your parents rather than, worship the memory? That would be more to their credit, I would think. The spirit of the deceased king then appears from the underworld to answer the vows of Yaman Ra Mu Mus Su. To him, the son, will be all good fortune, glory, health, and joy, and whatever else a man could wish, but of all what Yaman Ra Mu Mus Su most coveted, a very long term of life, to be measured by the 30 years feast of Jubilee. What gives this inscription its special value in relation to history can be stated in a few words. It is that Ptah Mer Satin was apparently buried, first of all, in Abydos, where the soil impregnated with salt is favorable to the preservation of the dead, and the position of his temple, dedicated to Yasir, quite agrees with this. His body was probably removed afterwards to Thebes. In the course of his long reign, Yaman Ra Mu Mus Su the second, completed the temple, begun by his father at Abydos. He must have been advanced in years when it was finished, since not less than 60 sons and 59 daughters greeted in their effigies the entrance of the pilgrims at the principal gate. In proportion as the works executed under Ptah-Mer Satin, the first, present splendid examples of Egyptian architecture and sculpture, just so as poor and inferior are the buildings executed by Yaman Ra Mu Mus Su, the second. The feeling also of the gratitude
toward its parent seems to have been gradually faded away as years increased upon him, to such a degree that he did not even deem it wrong to chisel out the names and memorials of his father in many places of the temple walls, and to substitute his own. In the 5th year of the king's reign, a great war broke out between Egypt and the Kheta, in which Kadesh was the rallying point. Besides the prince of Kheta, there were as his allies the kings and peoples of Arathu, Aradas, Kalebu, Haleb. Aradas is Arathu, of the riverland of Naharain, of Gadza Adana, Gauzanitis, Goshen, is also what its name's as, of Maluna, of Pedasa, Pedasis is what it's also known as, of Leka, the Belegias, of the Dardani, of Dandani, Dardanians in Kurdistan, of the Masu, the inhabitants of Mount Masius, of Kerkesh, the Girgesites, are Keshkesh, the Kir Kamash, Karkemish, of Akareth, of Anaugas, Gen Asas, of Mush Anath, all peoples from the extremes of the extremest end of the sea to the land of the Kheta. It was a slaughter of peoples, in the fullest sense of the word, that was prepared at Kadesh, out of which Yemen, Ra, Mu, Mas, Su came, but as a doubtful conqueror, and had to thank his own personal bravery for his life and preservation, since he was all alone and no other was with him. Well, a lot of kings say stuff like that. It's like, it's not these thousands of people behind me, like in the great Hindu battle of Kuru, etc. It's like, what, 5 people fought the whole other army? No. They led the thing. So when you're the victor, very often it's like, oh, well, my victory is general, but it was like the general fought himself. We still have some of the aspects of speaking that way, but a bit more honest, right? This heroic feast was the theme of the celebrated epic poem, Pentaur the Scribe, of which we not only possess a papyrus copy, but its words cover the whole surface of the walls in the temples at Abydos, Luxor, Karnak, the Ramesseum, and Abu Simbel. An unknown painter has chiseled in deep work on the wall of the temple at Karnak a vivid representation of the Battle of Kadesh, the storming of the fortress, the overthrow of the enemy, the details of the camp life of the Egyptians. The tent of Pharaoh is seen in the middle of the camp, and near it, the movable shrine of the entities considered to be divinities of Egypt. Above the picture is bestowed the inscription, "This is the first legion of Yemen who bestows victory on Yemen, Ra, Mu, Mas, Sa, Su." Ramses II. Pharaoh is with it. It is occupied in pitching its camp. Not far off sits the king enthroned, receiving the reports of his generals, while the soldiers are dragging forward 2 foreigners about whom the inscription says, "This is the arrival of the spies of Pharaoh. They bring 2 spies of the people of Kheta before Pharaoh. They are beating them to make them declare what the king of Keta is. Now, torture and stuff to get information is instantly not quite as reliable. Rather than what's being said on the news right now, if anybody questions or considers evidence that we don't approve of, then we're just going to assume that anybody who even associates with them only lies. But people will lie when being tortured or oppressed or something, just to get through. So, you know, it's not the best way. The war chariots and legions of Iman Ptah, Phra, and Setux are seen, passing in good order before the king. Mercenary troops are not wanting, for the Colchian Shardana, whose fine linen was well known to antiquity under the name of Sardanian, appear among the Egyptian allies. They are distinguished by their helmets with horns and a ball-shaped crest, by their long swords and the round shields on their left arm, while their right hand grasps a spear. The Keta and their allies are also vividly represented. The Canaanites are distinguished in the most striking manner from the allies of races unknown to us. Now, I don't like the idea of referring to just every single different ethnic group as like a different race. I think of it as more of a distinguished further divisions of subspecies of who are attired with turban-like coverings for the head, or with high caps, such as are still worn at the present day by the Persians. Short swords, lances, bows, and arrows form the weapons of the Egyptian enemies. Among the Tuher, chosen ones, who follow in the train of the Keta king, are the Kalau, are slingers, who formed his bodyguard. Wonderfully rich is the great battle picture, which represents the fight of the chariots before Kadesh on the banks of the Orontes, while the gigantic form of is it the first? Is it Ra Mas Sa Su? Or is it Yemen Ra Mu Mas Su? You know, without that little chick at the end, right? In the very midst of the mass of hostile chariots, performs deeds of the highest prowess, to the astonishment of the Egyptians and of their enemies. His bravest son, Prahe Unameth, as the chief commander of the chariots, heads the attack on the chariots of the enemy. Several of his brothers, the children of, I'll just presume it's Yemen, Ra, Mu, Mas, Su, the second. In the very midst of the mass of hostile chariots, performs deeds of the highest prowess, to the astonishment of the Egyptians and of their enemies. His brave son, Prahe Unameth, as the chief commander of the chariots, heads the attack on the chariots of the enemy. Several of his brothers, the children of Yemen, Ra, Mu, Mas, Su, take part in the battle. The chariots of the Keta and their warriors are thrown into the river, and among them the king of Kilabu, whom his soldiers have just dragged out of the water and are endeavoring to rescue, to restore to animation. They hold him head downwards by the legs. The inscription by the side runs thus: "This is the king of Kilabu. His warriors are raising him up after Pharaoh has thrown him into the water." The beginning of the battle is described in a short inscription annexed to the picture. When the king had halted, he sat down to the northwest of the town of Kadesh. He had come up with the hostile host of Keta, being quite alone, no other was with him. There were thousands and hundreds of chariots round about him on all sides. He dashed them down in heaps of dead bodies. Before his horses, he killed all the kings of all the peoples who were allies of the king of Keta, together with his princes and elders, his warriors and his horses. He threw them one upon another, head over heels, unto the water of the Orontes. There the king of Keta turned around and raised up his hands to implore the divine benefactor. The battle, or rather butchery, seems to have been as little agreeable to the people of Keta as to their lords, for the hostile Keta speak, praising the divine benefactor thus, give us freedom, literally breath, from thy hand, O good king, let us lie at thy feet, and fear of thee has opened the land of Keta. We are like the fowls of mares, which tremble in terror at the sight of the grim lion. In the customary manner, as already described, the inscriptions sing the praise of their king, the brave and bold conqueror of the nations, of the highest valor in the field of battle, firm on horseback and glorious on his chariots, whom none can escape when he seizes his bow and arrows. A less poetical and ornate description of the great battle of Kadesh is preserved in a record of repeated several times on temple walls. It runs as follows. And let me see, check here how many numbers there are. Whoa, 44. Okay. In the 5th year, in the month of Apephe, on the 9th day in the reign of the king Yemen Ra Mu Mus Su, second. The Pharaoh was in the land of Zahi on his second campaign. Good watch was kept over the king in the camp of Pharaoh on the heights of the south of the city of Kadesh. Pharaoh came forth as soon as the sun rose and put on the array of his father Mentu, and the sovereign went further upwards and came to the south of the town of Shabbatun. There came to meet him to Shasu in order to speak to Pharaoh thus: we are brothers who belong to the chiefs of the tribes of the Shasu, which are in the dominion of the king of Keta. They commanded us to go to Pharaoh to speak thus: we wish to be servants to the house of Pharaoh, so that we may separate ourselves from the land, from the king of Keta. But now the king of Keta stays in the land of Kilabu to the north of Tunep, for he fears Pharaoh, intending forwards to advance. Thus spake the two Shasu, but the words which they had spoken to the king were vain lies, for the king of Keta had sent them to spy out where Pharaoh was, so that the soldiers of Pharaoh should not prepare an ambush in the rear in order to fight with the king of Keta. For the king of Keta had come with all the kings of all peoples, with horses and riders, which he brought with him in great numbers, and stood there ready in an ambush behind the town of Kadesh, the wicked. And the king did not discover the meaning of their words. And Pharaoh went further downwards and came to the region in the northwest of Kadesh, where he stayed to rest on a golden couch of repose. There came in the spies who belonged to the servants of the king, and brought with them 2 spies of the king of Keta. When they had been brought forward, Pharaoh spoke to them. Who are ye? They said, we belong to the king of Keta. who sent us to see where Pharaoh is. Then spake to them Pharaoh, he where stays he, the king of Keta, for I have heard say that he is in the land of Kelebu. They said, behold, the king of Keta stays there, and much people with him, whom he has brought with him in great numbers from all the countries which are situated in the territory of the land of Keta, of the land of Naharain, and of the Kiti. They are provided with riders and horses who bring with them the implements of war, and they are more than the sand of the sea. Behold, they stay there in ambush to fight behind the town of Kadesh, the wicked. Then Pharaoh called the princes before him, that they might hear all the words which two spies of the land of Keta were present had spoken. The king spake to them, behold the wisdom of Pharaoh and of the princes of the land of the house of Pharaoh in this matter. They stood there speaking daily thus to Pharaoh, the king of Keta is in the land of Kelebu. He has fled before Pharaoh since he heard that he would come to him, according to the words of Pharaoh daily. Now behold what I have had to hear in this hour from two spies. The king of Keta has come with much people who are with him, with horses and riders, as many as the sand. They stand there behind the tower of Kadesh, the wicked. Thus has it happened that the governor and the princes knew nothing to whom the countries of the house of Pharaoh are entrusted. It was their duty to have said, they are come up. Then the princes who were before Pharaoh spoke thus, the fault is great which the governor and the princes of the house of Pharaoh have committed, that they did not make inquiries where the king of Keta stayed at each time, that they might have given notice daily to Pharaoh. Then was the commission given to the captain to urge on and haste the army of the king, which entered in the country to the south of Shabbatoon, to direct them to the spot where Pharaoh was, for Pharaoh had relied on the words of the princes, while in the meantime the king of Keta came up with much people that were with him, with riders and horses, so exceeding great was the number of the people that was with him. They had passed over the ditch, which is to the south of the town of Kadesh, and they fell upon the army of Pharaoh, which entered in without having any information. And the army and the horses of Pharaoh gave way before them on the road upwards to the place where the king was. Then the hostile host of the king of Keta surrounded the followers of Pharaoh, who were by his side. When Pharaoh beheld this, he became wroth against them, and he was like his father Mentu. He put on his war array, and he took his arms and appeared like the entity Baal in his time, when he mounted his horse and hurried forth in a quick course. He was all alone. He rushed into the midst of the hostile host of the king of Keta and the much people that were with him. And Pharaoh, like the entity Satux, the glorious, cast them down and slew them, and I, the king, flung them down, head over heels, one after another, into the water of the Arantha. I subdued all the people, and yet I was alone, for my warriors and my charioteers had left me in the lurch. None of them stood by me. Then the king of Keta raised his hands to pray before me. I swear it, as truly as the sun entity loves me, as truly as my father entity Tamu blesses me, that all the deeds which I, the king, have related, these I truly performed before my army and before my charioteers. About 2 years after the events described above, Pentaur the poet finished his heroic song.
Throughout the poem, the peculiar cast of Egyptian thought is clearly visible. Subjoined is a translation of it, and I guess next several pages will be in the next program.